The truth about Rush. I'm Michael Smerconish in Philadelphia. I didn't know Rush Limbaugh personally. I was in his company just once, but he had an enormous impact on my profession and our nation. News of his passing has been met with as divided a reaction as his work while he was alive. But Rush's legacy is more complicated than any caricature. I myself have previously written and spoken extensively about the destructive influence of a polarized media on our national discourse, and how I think an important milestone was his syndication in 1988. Quite simply, there would never have been a President Donald Trump without talk show host Rush Limbaugh paving the way. It's no coincidence that years before he announced his candidacy, Trump had a former aide listen to thousands of hours of talk radio to discover what issues Americans cared about most. After a 3-decade-long priming by Rush, by 2016, GOP primary voters were ready to vote for a candidate who reminded them of their favorite talk host, and Trump seized the moment. And like no one else before him, he resonated with Limbaugh's listeners. One need only look at the letter made public this week by the New York Times that a cousin sent to Congressman Adam Kinzinger, one of the few Republicans who had voted to impeach former President Trump. In castigating Kinzinger, the Trumper cited God, Trump, and talk radio hosts Limbaugh above all. Quote, "You should be very proud that you have lost the respect of Lou Dobbs, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, Greg Kelly, etc., and most importantly in our book, Mark Levin and Rush Limbaugh and Us." Think about that. Rush's sway over this person was such that it overruled her family loyalty and had her literally demonizing her cousin for having a difference of opinion. Such was Rush's reach with conservatives. With his passing, many others now finally recognize the truth of what I've been saying for years about how Limbaugh led the way to polarization and the coarsening of our national dialogue. But what's been missing in all the analysis from the left and the right is an accurate understanding of what made Limbaugh so effective, so impactful, whether you agreed or disagreed. I would argue it wasn't politics. It wasn't ideology. It was his mastery of entertainment skills. I saw it up close on a particular night, October of 2007. Back then, I was the morning man at a Philadelphia radio station, a Rush affiliate, when he came to speak at the ornate, historic Academy of Music in Philadelphia, the one-time home of the orchestra. When invited by station management to introduce him, I passed. I didn't feel it was right for me or for him. It was a year before the 2008 election, which would provide a breakpoint between me and the GOP. I knew I was about to renounce my Republican registration. But I did attend the event, taking my father as my guest. Dad was a big Rush fan. Beforehand, we went backstage and met Rush Limbaugh, then settled in to watch the performance. 90 minutes at a podium without notes. No PowerPoint, just his voice, conviction, humor, storytelling. With the strength of personality, he had an amazing hold over the audience. I wrote about what I witnessed in my column for the Daily News. I said, the maestro on stage at the Academy of Music 1 week ago wielded a microphone instead of a baton. And while the Philadelphia Orchestra was nowhere in sight, you could say the evening's selection was a version of Fanfare for the Common Man. The conductor, Rush Limbaugh. I then wrote about his rise, how he'd filled a void with his syndication when there were no conservative outlets. Rush, I said, built them a clubhouse. But mostly what stood out was his command of the spoken word, his raw entertainment skills. I concluded thusly, Rush on stage is more ringleader than Republican, more entertainer than conservative. Unassailable is his status as a headliner. You don't attract 15 million plus listeners a week or 2,000 people for a night on Broad Street by being anything less. That was 2007. By 2016, Rush and his imitators had created a climate that facilitated the nomination and ultimately the election of Donald Trump. When Trump gave Limbaugh the Presidential Medal of Freedom, it brought their story full circle. No one has explained the connection between talk radio and Trump's rise like Brian Rosenwald, a University of Pennsylvania professor who actually earned a PhD by studying talk radio. When in 2019 he published a book called Talk Radio's America, I hosted him here on CNN to explain the Trump-Limbaugh causation. Rush Limbaugh was watching, and he thought Rosenwald nailed it.
This guy kind of gets it. His name is Brian Rosenwald. He was on CNN Saturday, so nobody saw this, which is why I want to share the sound bites with you. Michael Smerconish was talking to him about his new book, Talk Radio's America. And Smerconish says, you say it wasn't the escalator ride that began the Trump candidacy. It was actually August 1st, 1988 that began the Trump candidacy. How come?
That's the day that Rush Limbaugh takes his act national. And it's a great show, and people tune in. And they start forming this habit of listening to talk radio and then later cable news. And what they hear every day is calls for a fighter. You know, it doesn't make for good radio to say, hey, nuance, compromise. That stuff's boring. But fighting, that's good radio. And Donald Trump captured that ethos.
So this guy is claiming that this program is what effectively set the stage, laid the groundwork for Trump to come in. Next question. Now, lest anybody think the book is a hit job on Rush, you give Limbaugh props, being a master showman and a performing virtuoso.
Michael, he blazed a path. He created an entirely different media form from anything that ever existed before because he's a great show. You know, early in his time on the air, he would abort callers. He would play a vacuum cleaner sound effect. You'd hear screams in the background as he's hanging up on a caller. There were things nobody had ever seen or heard, and people had to tune in every day because they never knew what he was going to say.
This guy gets it. This guy gets it more than anybody that I've ever encountered writing, either about talk radio in general or about this program.
Limbaugh liked that part, but there was more to my interview that he didn't air for his ditto heads. There's this mindset out there, you reference Puppet Master, that the whole talk landscape was controlled by individuals eager to spread conservative wisdom and ideology. In the book, that's not the conclusion you reach. What was the motivation?
The motivation, as Rush always said, was to charge confiscatory advertising rates, which means how can we make the most money? What's the best, most engaging show that we can put on every single day? And that didn't always work with what Republicans wanted to do. At times, Republicans would say, hey, this is the best deal we can cut. And talk radio would say, no, stand up and fight for us, fight for our values. They're rolling over again. For the mainstream media, for Democrats, that's all they do. They just roll over. And that's the sentiment that helps, give us Donald Trump.
Rush had a tendency to see things in black and white, not shades of gray. But his own legacy was more nuanced. Limbaugh was a gifted showman who unfortunately used those skills to usher in an era where entertainment and news reporting became conflated, enabling those who possessed microphones to supplant traditional political leadership, thereby valuing brand and soundbite over legislative achievement and rendering compromise a dirty word.